While walking through the park, a woman encountered a stray dog that seemed friendly but distressed. As she approached to offer some food, she heard a faint, familiar sound coming from the dog's fur. Intrigued and concerned, she gently examined the dog, trying to locate the source of the noise. The dog seemed to enjoy Emily combing through its fur. It had long white hairs, and it was very hard to even get to the dog's skin because of all the matting. The sound still played on repeat, and Emily tried to understand why it sounded so familiar. It was muffled, but she could swear she had heard it before. Her eyes widened in shock when she pushed a thick mat to the side, revealing a sophisticated microphone attached to the dog's collar. Shocked and confused, Emily detaches the device and inspects it. It's a high-end, discreet microphone, clearly not something a stray dog would typically have. And now that it wasn't covered by the dog's fur, she could clearly hear a sound coming out of it. She almost dropped the microphone in sheer disbelief and fear when she realized she was listening to her own voice. A conversation she had with her neighbor outside their homes a few days ago played on repeat. It was the moment Emily had asked her neighbor if she could look after her houseplants as she was planning on visiting her parents this weekend. Emily couldn't believe someone had been secretly recording her. And why? She looked around her, her heart racing as she searched for suspicious activity. Sadly, no one seemed to show any interest in her or the dog. She quickly put the microphone in her pocket, petted the dog on its head, and headed home, taking a detour just to be safe. Arriving home, Emily was in full panic mode. Moments she had felt like she was being watched this past week came flooding back, and she suddenly realized she had been way too careless about locking her doors. To her defense, she never feared for her own safety until now. Who owned that white dog, and why was it spying on her? She called her boyfriend Owen and asked him to come over immediately. Owen arrived not even 15 minutes later, looking bewildered and out of breath. "What's going on?" he asked her worriedly. Emily's eyes welled up with tears as she showed him the microphone and told him what happened. "What the f*** were the only words he found fitting for the situation, and he was kind of right. Emily didn't feel safe in her own home anymore. The recorded conversation had been outside her house, so the dog had been here with the microphone. She quickly closed all the blinds but froze when she looked out of the living room window. "Owen?" she whispered, keeping her eyes fixed on something outside. There is the dog," she said, her voice filled with fear. Owen ran to the window, but when he arrived, he saw no dog. "Where is it?" he asked, confused. Emily sighed. "He ran away as soon as I moved my mouth." She plopped down on her couch, hiding her face in her hands. "It feels like I'm losing my mind," she sobbed, tears dropping to the ground. Owen crouched down beside her, placing a hand on her back. "You're not." The fact that Owen believed her made her feel a bit better, but she still had to figure out who was spying on her. She had to make it stop, and she had to see for herself who had been the sick mastermind. She suddenly jumped up and leaped to the tiny microphone. "Could we connect this with our laptop?" she asked Owen hopefully. Owen was a bit unsure. He saw nothing that he could plug into his laptop. As he looked at the microphone intently, his eye fell on a teeny tiny logo. Without saying a word, he opened his laptop and typed in the name on the logo. "Rald Tech Company," Emily quietly said aloud. "I recognized that name from somewhere." Emily couldn't recall where she recognized the name Rald Tech Company from, and it gnawed at her. "Where have I seen that before?" she muttered, pacing around the living room. Owen watched her with concern, but he didn't have any answers either. "It sounds familiar, but I can't place it," she said, frustration evident in her voice. She grabbed her phone, scrolling through old emails and social media, hoping for a clue. Owen offered to take the microphone with him to work to show it to his IT colleague. "Maybe Jerry can figure something out," Owen suggested, holding the tiny device up to the light. "He's good with tech stuff." Emily nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. "Okay, that sounds like a plan," she agreed. "Just be careful with it." Owen placed the microphone in his bag, determined to get some answers. Emily couldn't sleep that night, feeling like she was being watched. Every creak and groan of the house made her jump. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities. "What if someone's outside?" she whispered to herself, pulling the covers up to her chin. She tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling of eyes on her, the thought of the dog haunting her. She heard every little sound, thinking someone was breaking into their home. The wind rattled the windows and Emily's heart pounded. A branch scraped against the side of the house, and she sat up, straining to listen. "Is someone there?" she whispered, inching toward the window. She peeked through the blinds, but saw nothing. Still, the fear gnawed at her, keeping her on edge. She stayed up, constantly checking the locks and windows. Emily tiptoed around the house, double-checking every door and window latch. "Everything's locked," she reassured herself, but it didn't help. She peered out into the dark yard, half expecting to see the white dog. "What is going on?" she muttered, wrapping her arms around herself. Sleep was impossible. All she could do was wait for morning. The next morning, Emily woke up to an empty bed. Owen had gone to work, taking the microphone with him. She stretched, feeling the weight of last night's fear still lingering. "I hope Jerry finds something," she muttered, rubbing her eyes. The house was eerily quiet, amplifying her unease. She took a deep breath, trying to shake off the anxiety, and got ready for work. Emily had to go to work as well, despite her unease. She dressed quickly, glancing around the house, double-checking the locks one last time. "I can't let this affect my job," she told herself, grabbing her bag. As she walked to her car, she kept looking over her shoulder, half expecting to see the white dog lurking. The drive to work felt longer than usual. Near her office entrance, she noticed the white dog sitting nearby. Emily froze, her heart pounding. "What's it doing here?" she whispered. The dog looked up, its eyes meeting hers. She felt a chill run down her spine. Just as she was about to turn and leave, she heard a familiar voice calling her name. "Emily, good morning." Her colleague James approached, smiling. "Hey, James," she greeted, trying to sound normal. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing her distracted look. "Yeah, just a bit tired," she replied, forcing a smile. As they entered the building, she glanced back at the dog, still watching her. Luckily, James chatted about their latest project, oblivious to her tension. She feared the dog would follow them inside, but it stayed put. At her desk, Emily had a clear view of the dog outside. She set her bag down and glanced out the window. The dog hadn't moved, its eyes still fixed on the entrance. Emily tried to focus on her work, but the dog's presence nagged at her. She tapped her pen nervously, stealing glances at the white figure sitting by the entrance, feeling its gaze on her. She couldn't keep her eyes off the dog, feeling uneasy. Every few minutes, Emily's gaze drifted back to the window. The dog hadn't moved an inch, its eyes still locked on the entrance. "Why is it here?" she muttered under her breath. Her work piled up, but she couldn't focus. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to type, the dog's presence gnawing at her nerves. During lunch, Owen texted her to call in sick and come to his work immediately. Emily's phone buzzed and she glanced at the screen. "Emily, you need to leave work now. Call in sick and come to my office." "It's urgent," the text read. Her stomach churned. She quickly dialed her boss's number, her voice shaky. "I'm not feeling well. I need to go home," she said. Terrified, Emily quickly called in sick and hurried to Owen's office. She grabbed her bag, her heart racing. "I'll be back tomorrow," she told her colleagues, her voice strained. She bolted out of the building, her mind racing with questions. What did Owen find? She wondered, her steps quickening. The need to get to Owen overshadowed her fear, pushing her forward. She made sure the white dog wasn't following her as she left. Emily glanced over her shoulder repeatedly, scanning the street for any sign of the dog. The last thing she needed was that eerie presence trailing her. She ducked into alleys and took a few detours, constantly checking her surroundings. By the time she reached Owen's office, she was out of breath, but relieved the dog was nowhere in sight. Emily arrived at Owen's office and he was waiting for her in the lobby. "Emily, over here," he called out, waving her over. She rushed to him, her eyes wide with worry. "What's going on, Owen?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I need to show you something," he replied, leading her towards the elevators. His serious expression did nothing to calm her nerves. Owen took Emily to the basement where his IT colleagues worked. "Follow me," he said, guiding her through the maze of corridors. They reached a door labelled IT Department. Owen opened it, revealing a room filled with computer screens and tech equipment. "This way," he said, leading her to a cluster of desks. Jerry, his colleague, looked up from his screen. "Emily, we need you to see this," Owen said. They reviewed the footage the microphone had recorded over the past weeks. Jerry clicked on a file and the screen lit up with video snippets. Emily's voice filled the room, snippets of her daily conversations playing back. "Here's where it starts," Jerry pointed out. Emily watched, horrified, as mundane moments of her life replayed on the screen. "How did they get all this?" she whispered, eyes wide with shock. Emily was shocked by the amount of recorded footage. Clip after clip, her private conversations unfolded on the screen. Every word, every laugh, every secret, captured without her knowledge. "This is insane," she muttered, her hands shaking. Owen put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure this out," he assured her. Emily couldn't tear her eyes away from the screen, each video adding to her growing sense of violation. She couldn't believe how long she had been spied on. The footage spanned weeks, maybe even months. "This has been going on forever," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who would do this?" Owen shook his head, equally baffled. "We'll get to the bottom of it," he promised. The realization that her every move had been watched made Emily feel sick. "We need to stop this person," she said firmly. Owen's IT colleague explained he hacked into the microphone. "I managed to access the device's internal data," Jerry said, pointing to a complex array of codes on his screen. "It's sophisticated, but not unbeatable." Emily leaned in, trying to understand. "What did you find?" she asked. Jerry clicked a few more times, bringing up a new screen. "I found out where the data was being sent," he said, looking serious. The microphone was connected to an IP address through Bluetooth. Jerry pointed to the screen, highlighting the connection details. "This device is pretty advanced," he said. "It's been streaming the audio to a remote IP address." Emily leaned closer, trying to make sense of the information. "Can we trace it?" she asked. Jerry nodded. "I've already started," he replied, typing rapidly on his keyboard. Owen watched intently, hope flickering in his eyes. The colleague tracked down the location where the microphone streamed Emily's conversations. "Got it," Jerry announced, pointing to a map on his screen. A red dot blinked on the map, marking the destination of the data. "It's an address not too far from here," he said. Emily's stomach churned at the thought. "We need to go there," she said, determination in her voice. Owen nodded, ready to protect her. Owen insisted on going to protect Emily, fearing for her safety. "You're not going alone," he said firmly, grabbing his keys. "It's too dangerous." Emily hesitated, but knew he was right. "Okay, let's go," she agreed. They left the building quickly, hearts pounding with adrenaline. "We'll figure this out," Owen promised as they got into the car. Emily nodded, grateful for his support, but scared of what they might find. As they were on their way, Emily suddenly yelled at Owen to stop the car. "Pull over!" she screamed, panic in her voice. Owen slammed on the brakes, swerving to the side of the road. "What's wrong?" he asked, turning to her with concern. Emily's breathing was rapid, her eyes wide with fear. "Just stop," she repeated, fumbling with her seatbelt. Owen looked around, trying to understand her sudden panic. Owen pulled over and Emily got out, hyperventilating. She stumbled onto the sidewalk, gasping for air. "Emily, what's going on?" Owen called after her, getting out of the car. She bent over, hands on her knees, trying to calm herself. I remembered something," she managed to say between breaths. Owen approached her slowly, unsure of what to do. "Take your time," he said gently, watching her with worried eyes. Emily remembered where she recognized the logo from, but refused to tell him. She straightened up, her breathing steadying. "I know where it's from," she said quietly. Owen looked at her expectantly. "Where?" he asked, desperate for answers. Emily shook her head. "I can't tell you," she replied firmly. Owen's confusion deepened. "Why not?" he pressed. Emily avoided his gaze, her expression determined yet conflicted. Owen pressed her to explain, but Emily insisted on handling it alone. "Emily, you can't just keep this to yourself," he urged. She shook her head again, taking a step back. "I have to do this on my own, Owen," she insisted. "Please trust me." Owen's frustration was evident, but he nodded reluctantly. "Okay, but be careful," he said. Emily gave him a small, sad smile before turning away. Emily ran away, leaving Owen confused and concerned. She sprinted down the sidewalk, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and determination. Owen watched her go, torn between following her and respecting her wishes. "Emily, wait!" he called out, but she didn't stop. She disappeared around a corner, her pace not slowing. Owen stood by the car, feeling helpless and worried about what she was planning to do. Owen drove beside Emily, urging her to get back in the car. "Emily, please, get in!" he shouted through the open window, driving slowly to keep pace with her. She ignored him, her focus straight ahead. "You're being reckless!" Owen continued, his voice filled with concern. Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I have to do this, Owen!" she yelled back, her voice breaking. Emily, with tears streaming down her face, told Owen to go home. "Just go, Owen, please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. Owen slowed the car to a stop, staring at her in disbelief. "I can't leave you like this," he said softly. Emily wiped her tears, her resolve firm. "You have to. I need to handle this alone," she insisted. Owen hesitated, then finally nodded. "Be safe," he said, before driving off. Frustrated, Owen decided to drive to the address alone. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing with questions. "Why wouldn't she tell me?" he muttered. The GPS guided him through unfamiliar streets, but his determination didn't waver. He couldn't just sit back and wait. Emily needed answers, and he was going to find them. He pressed harder on the gas, eager to reach his destination. Owen hoped to get answers and arrived at the address quickly. The house was nondescript, blending in with the neighborhood. He parked the car, taking a deep breath. "This is it," he whispered to himself. He got out and approached the front door, his heart pounding in his chest. The urgency of the situation pushed him forward. He needed to know who was behind this. He rang the doorbell angrily, demanding an explanation. The sound echoed through the quiet street. Owen stood on the porch, fists clenched, ready for a confrontation. "Come on, answer," he growled, pressing the bell again. Footsteps approached from inside, and the door creaked open slightly. Owen leaned in, ready to unleash his frustration. He wasn't leaving until he got some answers. A man around Owen's age opened the door, recognizing Owen immediately. The man's eyes widened in shock. "Owen," he said, his voice trembling. Owen stared at him, confused and suspicious. "Do I know you?" he asked, trying to place the familiar face. The man nodded slowly. "Yes, it's me, Gary." "We went to school together," he replied, but it was clear that he was lying. Owen, confused, demanded to know why the man was spying on Emily. "What the hell is going on, Gary?" he snapped. "Why are you spying on Emily?" Gary's face turned pale, and he glanced nervously around. "It's complicated, Owen," he stammered. "I can explain." Owen stepped closer, his anger boiling over. "Then start talking," he said through gritted teeth. "Now." The man tried to close the door, but Owen forced his way inside. "You're not shutting me out," Owen yelled, pushing past Gary. The door slammed against the wall as Owen barged into the living room. Gary stumbled back, fear flashing in his eyes. "Owen, wait! You don't understand," he pleaded. But Owen was done waiting for explanations. He scanned the room, looking for any clues. Owen was shocked to see TV screens showing footage of Emily's frequent locations in the man's living room. "What the hell?" he muttered, stepping closer to the screens. Each one displayed different places Emily had been recently: her home, her office, even the park. "You've been watching her," Owen said, his voice shaking with anger. Gary stood silently, his guilt evident. "Why, Gary? Why are you doing this?" Emily arrived, out of breath, and burst into the house. "Owen!" she called out, spotting him near the TV screens. She rushed over, her eyes wide with shock. "What is all this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Owen turned to her, his face grim. "He's been spying on you," he said. Emily looked around, horror dawning on her as she took in the surveillance setup. "Gary, why?" she demanded. Emily recognized the man immediately, and he tried to run away. "Gary, you're behind this!" she exclaimed. Gary's face twisted with panic. "I can explain, Emily," he said, backing towards the door. But before he could make his escape, Emily blocked his path. "You're not going anywhere," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Gary darted towards another exit, desperation driving him. Owen tackled the man, preventing his escape. With a quick, powerful move, he brought Gary to the ground. "You're not getting away with this," Owen growled, pinning him down. Gary struggled, but Owen's grip was too strong. "Let me go!" Gary shouted, but Owen tightened his hold. Emily watched, a mix of anger and relief washing over her. "It's over, Gary," she said quietly. Emily revealed the man as Gary, an ex-coworker who left to work for Wild Tech. "Owen, this is Gary," she said, her voice steady. "We used to work together before he left for Wild Tech." Owen's eyes widened in recognition. "Gary? You did this?" he asked, disbelief in his voice. Gary looked away, guilt etched on his face. "It's not what you think," he muttered, but Emily wasn't buying it. Owen pressured Gary to explain himself, threatening to call the police. "You better start talking," Owen demanded, his phone in hand. "Or I'm calling the cops right now." Gary's eyes darted around the room, panic setting in. "You don't understand," he stammered. "It's more complicated than that." Owen stepped closer, his patience wearing thin. "Make me understand then," he said, his tone firm. "Why are you spying on Emily?" Gary denied everything at first, but eventually broke down. "I didn't do anything wrong," he insisted, but his voice cracked. Emily and Owen exchanged glances, knowing he was lying. Finally, Gary's shoulders slumped. Okay, he said, tears welling up. "I did it, but it's not what you think." He sank to the floor, head in his hands. "I just wanted to protect you, Emily," he sobbed. Gary admitted he had been monitoring Emily out of a twisted sense of protectiveness. "I couldn't just leave you alone," he said, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. "I thought if I kept an eye on you, I could keep you safe." Emily's face hardened. "By spying on me? That's not protection, Gary," she replied. Owen tightened his grip on Gary's arm, keeping him in place. "This is messed up," he said. He was fueled by jealousy and an unhealthy obsession over time. "I couldn't stand the thought of you being with someone else," Gary confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to be the one looking out for you, always." Emily shook her head, disgusted. "This isn't love, Gary. This is obsession," she said firmly. Owen nodded in agreement. "You need help?" he added, watching Gary closely. Gary explained he couldn't let go after leaving the company. "When I left Wild Tech, I felt lost," he said, his voice trembling. "I couldn't handle not seeing you every day, Emily. It was like a part of me was missing." Emily's eyes narrowed. "So you stalked me instead?" she asked, incredulous. Gary nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't know what else to do," he admitted. Emily felt betrayed and angry at Gary's actions. "I trusted you," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "We were friends, Gary. How could you do this to me?" Gary looked down, unable to meet her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you," he whispered. Owen stood by, his expression grim. "You crossed a line, Gary," he said. "You invaded her privacy and betrayed her trust." Owen urged Emily to call the police immediately. "We can't just let this go," he said firmly. "He needs to face the consequences." Emily hesitated, her emotions in turmoil. "Are you sure?" she asked, looking at Owen. He nodded. "Yes, Emily, this is serious. You need to protect yourself." She took a deep breath, realizing he was right. "Okay," she said, reaching for her phone. "I'll call them." Emily decided to call the police, fearing for her safety. She dialed 911, her hands shaking. "Hello, I need to report a crime," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Owen stood by her side, offering silent support. "There's a man who's been spying on me," she continued, giving the dispatcher Gary's address. "Please hurry." She hung up, feeling a mix of fear and relief. The police arrived and arrested Gary, collecting all the evidence. 2 officers entered the house, their expressions serious. "Gary Thompson, you're under arrest," one said, cuffing his hands. Gary didn't resist, his head hanging low. The other officer began collecting the surveillance equipment, bagging it as evidence. "We'll take it from here," the officer assured Emily. She watched as they led Gary away, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. Emily pressed charges, and Gary was sentenced to jail. In court, she recounted the terrifying invasion of her privacy. Owen sat beside her, offering silent support. The judge listened carefully before handing down the sentence. "Gary Thompson, you are sentenced to 5 years in prison," the judge declared. Emily exhaled, feeling a sense of justice. Gary was led away in handcuffs, and Emily knew she had done the right thing. Emily felt a mix of relief and lingering fear, but was determined to move forward. "It's over," Owen reminded her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Emily nodded, trying to believe it. "I know, but it's hard to shake the feeling," she admitted. They walked out of the courthouse together, the sun shining brightly. "We'll take it one day at a time," Owen said. Emily smiled, grateful for his support. Emily and Owen worked to rebuild their sense of security and trust. They installed new locks and a security system in their home. "This feels better," Emily said, testing the new locks. Owen nodded, agreeing. "No one's getting in here without us knowing," he assured her. They also spent more time together, rekindling their bond. "We're stronger now," Emily said one evening. Owen smiled. "Yes, we are," he replied. They adopted the white dog, naming him Hope, as a symbol of resilience. The dog's wagging tail and bright eyes brought joy back into their lives. "Welcome home, Hope," Emily said, petting the dog's soft fur. Owen chuckled as Hope licked his hand. "He's perfect," Owen said. The dog's presence reminded them of their strength and ability to overcome challenges together. "Hope is exactly what we needed," Emily agreed. Emily became an advocate for privacy rights, sharing her story to help others. She spoke at community centres and schools, raising awareness about the importance of privacy. "No one should have to go through what I did," she said during one talk. Owen supported her every step of the way. "You're making a difference," he told her proudly. Emily nodded, determined to protect others from similar invasions of privacy.